The young man walked through the technological facilities while questioning the command's decisions. Reports indicated noble deaths and covert operations, leading him to wonder why Iskan had been sent on the mission, even with the obvious risk of causing problems. The consequences were severe, resulting in discreet funerals to avoid larger scandals. The superior, however, reminded the young man that he was still just an intern, in contrast to Iskan's decades of experience. The commander, visibly stressed and touching his head, explained the origin of the conflict. It all started when Zakanin felt betrayed by Nikolaos, someone he believed to be his lover. The intern listened attentively to the details of the plot. In response to the betrayal, Zakanin requested an assassination from the Nemesis organization, which accepted the contract with the hidden intention of increasing its control over him. The superior noticed the exhaustion on the young man's face and made an admission. He confessed that he already presumed that this chaotic scenario would happen the moment he decided to send Iskan on the operation. The mention of the need for authority brought back the memory of the disguises used. A penetrating gaze revealed the cunning needed to navigate that underworld of espionage. To command the respect that his position demanded, an older and more distinguished appearance had been adopted. The young man knew that his real face did not carry the necessary weight for that specific situation. Back in the office, the intern stood firm in front of his boss's desk. The main question remained in the air. The command knew that Iskan would cause that disaster and allowed it anyway. The commander, displaying his scars and a defiant smile, dismissed the subordinate's concern. He stated firmly that, as a soldier, he was perfectly capable of ensuring his own protection. The young man received the answer with a cold, analytical look. He perceived the unwavering confidence of the man in front of him, but his mind continued to work on the details of the conspiracy. The narrative returned to the crucial facts of the mission. The assassination request made to Nemesis was not just a contracted service, but the central axis of the entire political maneuver. The commander interlaced his fingers, assuming a serious posture. He clarified that Nemesis fulfilled the request not out of loyalty, but because it planned to subjugate Zakanin through that blood debt. The young man began to process the implications of that strategy. The complexity of the power game was revealed to be much greater than a simple, passionate revenge. The tension increased as he connected the final points of his reasoning. A drop of sweat evidenced the mental effort to unravel the true intention behind Nemesis's movements. The young man then presented his final deduction to his superior. He concluded that Nemesis foresaw Zakanin's reaction and manipulated the scenario on purpose to eliminate Nikolaos. The dark-haired young man pondered the situation. He knew that Kinuan represented an obstacle that could not be ignored. Before him, the scarred man maintained a heavy silence, processing the information without saying a word. The door opened suddenly, letting the outside light invade the dimness of the room. The protagonist stopped at the entrance. He calculated that he would be safe as long as Hylas's attention was fixed on Kinuan, making any in-depth investigation useless. Decided, he took the first step. The sound of his boots echoed, marking the beginning of his movement. Now, however, a choice needed to be made. The young man covered his head with the hood, mentally preparing for what was to come. He arrived at the gang's office in the lower sector, an imposing and busy structure in the middle of the industrial area. Inside, a girl with glasses greeted him with great excitement, inviting everyone to celebrate the new company's inauguration. The young man observed the environment as he entered. The place was crowded, with several robust-looking men listening to the welcome speech. Sitting casually, he explained his presence there with indifference, claiming only to have some free time in his schedule to visit the lower sector. Nearby, a black-haired woman manipulated precision instruments with a fascinated smile on her face. She chatted animatedly with a blond man, whose cybernetic implants were exposed as he laughed at the situation. Their gazes briefly met. The woman seemed amused by something, while the protagonist assessed her seriously. Later, under the starry sky, the city lights shone over the silent, technological streets. They walked together along the neon-lit sidewalk. The woman, curious, took advantage of the moment alone to inquire about the nature of his activities. The woman declared that she would cover all the financial losses out of her own pocket. Her posture was firm, leaving no room for discussion about payment. She continued to speak intensely, sealing the agreement verbally. The young man, caught off guard by her assertiveness, simply listened as she defined the rules of that environment. A drop of sweat ran down the young man's face. The gravity of the situation began to weigh on him, generating a visible discomfort. Without waiting for an immediate response, the young woman passed by him. Her firm steps indicated that she was ready to move on. However, she stopped and looked back. Realizing that he still had something stuck in his throat, she challenged him to say what he was thinking. The protagonist remained still, with the tension evident in his gaze. He seemed to struggle internally to find the right words in the face of that pressure. The young man explained that the succession dispute would need to happen much faster than expected. Time was not on their side. The scenario was catastrophic. If another faction took control of the family, Ile would be killed or maimed, as no usurper would allow the legitimate heir to survive. The woman widened her eyes, absorbing the shock of that information. The brutal threat to Ile's life made reality much darker. She lowered her head, letting her bangs cover her eyes. Silence took over as she processed the impending danger. However, to his surprise, a slight, confident smile curved her lips. She didn't seem intimidated by the deadly challenge. Turning to him, she stated that he could mock her as much as he wanted. The young woman was aware of the situation, but maintained her conviction. She crossed her arms, demonstrating an unwavering determination. She was willing to follow that path if it guaranteed their objective. The boy watched her silently, still worried. He realized that, behind that smile, there was a dangerous resolve that he couldn't ignore. The woman seemed unable to hide her anguish. The weight of the situation was clearly visible on her contorted face, revealing the internal conflict consuming her. Lucaeus, however, got straight to the point. The boy stated that she knew perfectly well that he wouldn't refuse the proposal, making his choice inevitable from the start. The protagonist maintained a serious and resigned expression. He understood the manipulation behind the request, but accepted the burden without showing apparent anger. His words hit Giselle deeply. The young woman felt tears forming, confronted by the harsh truth of that forced alliance and the guilt she carried. Under the night sky, silence hung between them. She looked away, unable to sustain the gaze in the face of the cold acceptance demonstrated by the boy. Her frustration manifested physically. Giselle squeezed the fabric of her clothes tightly, trying to contain the intense emotions that threatened to overflow at that moment. A week later, the scenario changed drastically. Lucaeus and Giselle appeared transformed, dressed in impeccable gala attire, ready to face their public obligations. As they entered the great hall, they were greeted with extreme reverence. Those present greeted Sir Lucaeus and Miss Giselle, formally recognizing the prestigious medal he now wore. While the modern city kept its pace outside, Lucaeus's thoughts were dark. He felt a contradictory pain, aware that, despite the honors, he was treading a morally questionable path. A transport ship landed on the outer platform, attracting the attention of the crowd. The vehicle's arrival signaled the official start of the solemn proceedings. Inside the palace, the pair remained still before the assembled court. The atmosphere was heavy, charged with the expectation of everyone who watched the new protagonists of that scene. A firm step echoed on the polished floor. There was no more room for hesitation. The decision to move forward had already been made, and the protocol needed to be followed. Surrounded by servants bowing in absolute respect, Lucaeus felt genuine discomfort. All that adoration and formality seemed strange to him, almost unreal. The pair walked down the long corridor under the attentive and curious gazes of those present. They maintained a rigid and elegant posture, playing their roles perfectly in that social theater. Their arrival immediately attracted the unwanted attention of those present. Malicious murmurs spread among the guests, who pointed and whispered without any discretion. One of the nobles did not hesitate to raise his voice, publicly labeling Lucaeus as a high-level criminal. The mockery in his voice had the clear aim of humiliating the newcomer before the elite. Lucaeus endured the insults in silence, although the tension was visible on his face. Beside him, Giselle stopped, feeling the weight of the judgmental looks falling on them. The vast hall, with its imposing architecture and luxurious chandeliers, seemed small in the face of the hostility that filled the environment. The opulence of the place contrasted with the coldness of the reception. However, their path was suddenly blocked. A man with his back to them intervened, making it clear that the conversation was not over yet, and demanding attention. The individual turned around with a polished smile, but loaded with ulterior motives. He addressed Giselle directly, greeting her with a familiarity that sounded dangerously false. The impact of that encounter was immediate for the young woman. Giselle recoiled, bringing her hand to her chest, visibly shaken upon recognizing who was before her. The man let out a low laugh, amused by the shock and discomfort that his presence caused her. His expression denoted a sadistic pleasure in the situation. Realizing Giselle's state, Lucchese's posture changed instantly. He turned to the provoker, and the atmosphere around them became heavy. The protagonist's eyes narrowed, focused entirely on the threat in front of him. His patience had run out. A wave of pure murderous intent exploded silently. The pressure was so intense and sudden that it seemed capable of crushing the will of anyone nearby. The noble, once arrogant, froze in terror. Cold sweat ran down his face as he stared into the abyss, realizing the fatal mistake he had made in provoking that man. Lucchese kept his gaze fixed and icy on him. Without needing to utter a single verbal threat, he made it clear who really held the power there.